my mom came out when I was 17 or 18. So now we're going on almost 20 years. So, I mean, massively different landscape. I'm a child still at that point, not an adult. Different landscape of religion, the world. So there's just a lot of implications there that I had to wrestle with. When I'm saying certain words, you think I'm saying X, but I'm actually saying Y, and vice versa. So I kind of tried to make this poem of like, hey, let's two separate things. What's the difference? Just to try to wake people up on the paradigm and the worldview. There's been a dominant ideological shift in a lot of the country about how they feel about religion. I mean, this was so early viral that like I was the topic of conversation on the internet for like 3 weeks. That is insane. Like actually, and deeply painful and hard and difficult.
First of all, this is my voice. I'm Tim Green and I have ALS. This podcast is not about ALS or living with disabilities. I don't want you to feel sorry for me. I don't feel sorry for me. I am a father of 5 with a marriage that's lasted for over 33 years. I am a #1 New York Times best-selling author of 41 books, an NFL first-round pick with an 8-year career. I worked on TV for Fox Sports, Good Morning America, Court TV, and Extra. I've hosted BattleBots, A Current Affair, and Find My Family. And I am also a practicing attorney. In this podcast, we're diving into real-life stories. From triumphs to trials, we'll explore the extraordinary in the ordinary. Join me, Tim Green, and my son Troy each week for real conversations, laughter, and insights. Because life is a journey, and everyone's got a story. My voice in today's episode is powered by 11 Labs. Jeff Bethke, I'm excited we get to speak with you on our podcast today. You are a best-selling author of many books and a social media sensation with over 35 million views on your groundbreaking spoken word poem, Why I Hate Religion But Love Jesus. Thank you so much for taking some time to talk with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. Man, I haven't had that video reference in a long time, so that actually meant a lot too. I'm like, oh yeah, I forgot that's how I kind of cut my teeth and got into this whole thing. Now at this point, I feel old. Just one little fun story is my like good friend who I just met and have developed a really serious relationship with here. He has high school and college students. And the high schooler was like, oh, they've been showing that video in my like Bible class so we can like debate about it and learn whatever. I'm like, that's what you do with like the Gettysburg Address in history class is like you debate an old thing. So I'm like, man, I'm old if they're using it as like a debate point in their Bible class.
Yeah, they're bringing it up in history class. I don't know.
Yes.
Let's begin back when you were just a child. Where did you grow up and when were you first introduced to religion and Jesus?
Great question. So I was raised in Seattle, Washington. Well, Tacoma, Washington, if you're familiar with the area. I say Seattle for people who don't know Washington, 30 minutes outside of Seattle. Very similar, though, very large city. It's the second largest city in Washington. So kind of like a Minneapolis, St. Paul vibe with the two. And single mom, really tough upbringing. Knew my dad, but he wasn't super around a ton. I had 2 sisters. They lived with him. I lived with my mom. So just a really dysfunctional, kind of unhealthy. I mean, and I love my family. Like my mom would say this. Other people would say this. Just really not a good spot. My mom had some seasons of mental illness. We were pretty much almost homeless my entire childhood, right on the edge. We're like government housing, food stamps, Social Security, all that stuff. And just we're one bad, carburetor going out from being homeless for like 20 years. But praise to my mom, she really had the foresight to be like, man, I need to make sure my son's in a really, really good environment around really, really good men and around other really good friends. And so she constantly, and she loved Jesus. And so she would constantly, I just grew up going to church. It didn't feel like the, squeaky clean, like growing up going to church family. Like we kind of went here or there and obviously life was hard and all that. But I was around enough to kind of be surrounded. Like I have very fond memories of the church, for lack of a better term, which is funny. I wrote that video, but I have very, very fond subjective experience with the church because, getting groceries from the church, other men with their sons taking me on camping trips. Like I have very, very, very soft spot in my heart for the church and how it blessed me as a kid. But of course, personally, it's just the temptation you fall into of like, oh, I just need to do all the right things, say all the right things, act the right way. And so then that tended to kind of bring me to a dark spot in high school and college, which is when I started following Jesus. And where that video came from, it was kind of my own self journey of like, oh, these are 2 very different things. What I thought was kind of, I guess, what I heard and listened to growing up, but I didn't really pay attention to a ton, to actually like a real transformative relationship with the Lord. So, I think that answers that. But that's a really good question.
Did your parents split when you were young, or were you older when your parents?
No, so they never even got married, which is funny. They just kind of,
Okay.
had my sisters and had me at different points of the journey, which you know what that means, but never got married and never even really lived together. So that is kind of a wild thing. There's pros and cons to that, but there was a normalcy around that I kind of am thankful for. Meaning, like, I actually do think it'd be really, really painful and more dramatic if like you're 7 or you're 9 or you know what I mean. But yeah,
Mhm.
it was. I just grew up with just my mom.
What's the age difference with your sisters?
They're both 5 years ahead of me each, so 5 and 10. So I'm
Got
35,
it.
so that'd be 40 and 45.
It's well documented that your mother is openly gay. Did that have any hand in your rejection of religion but not Jesus? Was the passion for Jesus still there because he loves your mother as much as you do, regardless?
Man, another great question. I've never gotten these specific questions in a long time. Thank you. Well done. Um, yeah, that was obviously a particular part of obviously a big part of my story, particular part of my journey. And now we're going on. My mom came out when I was 17 or 18, so now we're going on almost 20 years. So I mean, massively different landscape. I'm a child still at that point, not an adult. Different landscape of religion, the world. So there's just a lot of implications there that I had to wrestle with. And yeah, I don't know if I could articulate. It definitely affected. I will say this: it made me well. Season one of that, meaning like the first fruit of that, was like because I was still a child, a lot of like frustration, anger, confusion, unsure of what was going on. And then also just kind of like, oh man, like there's some implications with that of what that means for me. And do I belong? Should I even be here? All these different things. But then, once I started walking, I wasn't walking with the Lord at the time. Once I started walking with the Lord 3, 4 years later, and he really got a hold of my heart, then yeah, it was a significant kind of revisiting of not only the theological implications there of having to really wrestle with that, and me and my mom have had to have difficult conversations because of that, but then absolutely that me also needing to repair some stuff that I was frustrated by and angry by, and being like and seeing, trying to see the world and people and neighbors and my mom and myself and everyone through the lens of Jesus in a different way. So yeah, that one is like could be a whole hour episode because I've never been asked that question so specifically to give a really distilled like answer. But yeah, that there's a lot there. There's a lot on that one. So that's a really really good question. But the short answer I think to your question is yes. I think if I remember exactly how you phrased it, yeah.
So I'm not as well versed as you two guys are. So basically, you're at church, and the church you were at, saying that that wasn't the right lifestyle to live. Then you hear it, and it kind of, I guess, hits you at your core, right? And you have to figure out, reconcile with your mom and with people at the church. And was the church supportive of it, or were they against it?
Yeah, so we went to, it's kind of hard to explain because we went to a bunch of different churches. And then at that point, I was in I just went off to college after then. And so, like, we're in different states. So there's a lot of different parts to the journey. One thing I would say that I love about me and my mom is that I think we can kind of be a cool microcosm of this, of the where there's a lot of really frustration in the country now. Because to be clear, like, I really, I theologically believe in male and female marriages. And I really think that scriptures do that. I think that's for the human flourishing of mankind. Um, but there's ethical implications to that and what that means and what world we live in. And me and my mom have really hard conversations, but we're like, she's one of my closest friends. We hang out all the time. We talk all the time. And so that sounds weird to a lot of people because this has become so charged, and you could take the abortion issue, same thing. Like, there's so many, they've become issues, not real people and real lives and your real family. And so it is really frustrating to me when I see people kind of cutting each other off for certain reasons. Like, you can believe certain things and still be in relationship with certain people in a really deep way. And there's layers to that. There's ethical implications to that. There's theological implications to that. There's sociological implications to that. There's a lot. But it's a frustrating where we've gotten to in our country where that's such a charged topic that we usually then demonize the other side and kind of like push them and then push them away and never talk to them again. And I appreciate my mom and her grace towards me, and hopefully she appreciates my grace towards her. But yeah, if that makes sense.
Yeah, everything's become so tribal. It's like everyone wants
So
to
much.
win every argument.
Yeah, exactly. There's a book that is probably one of my favorite books of all time, Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt. He's the guy that wrote Anxious Generation that just came out that's blowing up on phone use and all this stuff. He wrote this one maybe 15 years ago, and he really goes through the psychological and the sociological research on political, like just what happens in your brain chemically, physically, socially. It's wild on kind of that political division side of things, and it's one of my favorite books. And he's a NYU professor. It's a very, very well researched, incredible book.
The podcast is called Nothing Left Unsaid, so I'm just making sure we live up to the name. Your answer does make a lot of sense. So what inspired you to create that viral video, and how did its reception affect you, both personally and professionally?
So what inspired me to write it is, I was going to a very, very deeply progressive non-Christian college in Portland, Oregon, to play baseball. Now, again, I grew up in that environment. Like, I love that environment. I'm not one of the, like, I actually kind of like being like, and I was a Christian at the time. I kind of like my personality likes to be the minority of just like, oh, I don't need everyone to believe what I believe or think what I think. So I had no problems with it. It was actually kind of fun. I have great friends still from that. But it was quite a worldview shock of me being like, oh, I'm the only one, like back then, 15 years ago, what Portland campuses, what like kind of Oregon progressive campuses were saying, that was the only place is now kind of mainstream. But that was one of the only places you can find it. And so I was like, oh, this is really interesting. This is some wild beliefs or some interesting thoughts. So I just had to wrestle with that. And I found myself in a lot of conversations with people. And then that actually gets back to what I said about religion and Jesus earlier, is almost every time I would get into a conversation with someone about Jesus in that kind of worldview, it was basically almost everything they would say about Jesus. I would say, well, I agree with you. Like, meaning that's over here, but I'm talking about this thing over here, or like, let's talk about Jesus. And they would want to kind of go over here to the stuff, the institution, the hurt, the whatever, which is real and was valid, but it's not Jesus. And so, okay, let's talk about this. What does that mean? And so I found that really interesting. And so that's then why I wrote the poem, is I wrote that poem for an open mic at that college of basically like, oh, I'm having a hard time. Like, when I'm saying certain words, you think I'm saying X, but I'm actually saying Y, and vice versa. So I kind of tried to make this poem of like, hey, let's two separate things. What's the difference? Just to try to wake people up on the paradigm and the worldview. And so it wasn't intended to be some viral video. It wasn't intended to be something big. I shot it. I recited at the open mic, and then I was home a couple weeks later, and my best friend, who was like 19 at the time, who was a videographer, was like, oh, we're bored this weekend. Let's make a video. Kind of like how people make TikToks today. It's just like, we weren't trying to do anything. It was just like, whatever, let's make some content. Thought 5 people would see it, and more than 5 people saw it. So then how did it affect me professionally and vocationally and personally? I mean, it turned my life upside down. Like, literally everything I'm doing to this day is because of that. There was I also think there's a lot of grace on that, a lot of luck on that, because there's so many people that have that moment, but then aren't able to build something from it, steward something from it. And I don't think that's really my, doing. I think it's just I got kind of lucky. I mean, I try to be super, super, super sensitive and wise about talking to mentors. What should I do? How should I steward this? Blah, blah, blah. I work really hard, but yeah, I can't take credit for it. So, but yeah, turn my life upside down, and everything we do now, books, everything, businesses, ministries, kind of can be traced back to one 4-minute and 32-second video or whatever it is, which is kind of a wild thing to say. Not many people have that experience.
Did it all blow up like overnight, or was it slowly over time?
No, it was overnight. It was literally like I uploaded it, and the next day it was like 1 million views, which I still don't even understand how that happened. Like, back then, that's just like, I didn't have a platform. I didn't post it. I didn't have any followers. So I really don't know. And then within 2 days, I'm on like the CBS morning show and this show. It was just like, it was crazy, on the front of the New York Times. And it was kind of bonkers for like 3 weeks within like the first 24 hours. So wild. I don't wish to relive it. That's for sure.
I was just going to ask, what was that like?
Yeah, it was just insane. I don't, and not to like compare virality now, but it's way more ethereal now. Like, it's quicker and it lasts less. Like, it has less density. So it's kind of just like mist. It's just like you go viral for 5 minutes and then the next thing goes viral. I mean, this was so early viral that like I was the topic of conversation on the internet for like 3 weeks. That is insane. Like, actually, and deeply painful and hard and difficult, because it's just like a human spirit is not meant to kind of bear that weight, bear that like that amount of concentrated eyeballs and opinions. So I don't want to relive it ever. I'm really thankful it happened because of where we're at. But yeah, it was bonkers, man. Bonkers.
I'm sure you got a lot of people really pissed off with that video. Was there what would you guess the balance was of, like, I guess, praise to people who were, were angry about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to like it's very subjective, but I think it was probably split. and then and without and it wouldn't have blown up. It wouldn't have gotten as big as it did if there wasn't enough people disagreeing with it. That was almost what made it blow
Yeah.
up. Is it became like a flash rod for everyone's theological beliefs, everyone's denominations, everyone's. So that was wild, and that's what made it really challenging. Is it became something outside of me, but I was the flashpoint for it. And realize that people don't realize every time they volley back and forth on a debate about a theological idea that one person was saying on a YouTube video that like I kind of get caught up in that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Is how old were you at the time? 20?
22. Yeah, yeah.
You're like 22 years old and having, millions of people supporting you, but also millions of people, being pretty nasty. I'm sure it's tough.
Yeah, exactly. That it was like the nastiness was tough. I'm really thankful I was dating my wife at the time. I'm really thankful for mentors and a couple close friends that were like absolutely kind of that like, because it was also the same week. I don't know if you remember this. I went viral during the same week the Coney video went viral. Do you remember that video? The Joseph Coney Invisible Children video? Same week. And that guy kind of ends up, like 3 weeks later, like running around naked in like downtown LA and like being on TMZ because he had a mental breakdown. That's insane. But that's insane. I feel for him, but I think it was because it just showed the pressure of what that can do if you're not deeply rooted and surrounded.
Yeah, for sure. You see it too with like, again, not a direct comparison, but you see it with like, I'll use the NFL because football backgrounds we have, but you see like a 21-year-old kid get drafted in the first round to go to a team in New York or a big media, and they struggle at quarterback, whatever, and they get killed by the media and they just disappear. They have all the talent in the world, but just that pressure of that many people, that many eyeballs, like you said, really, no one's really meant to have that much attention and let alone negative attention.
Exactly. 100%.
Everyone handles that kind of attention differently, and it's very hard to know how you will react to it until you face it. Can you share your own personal journey to faith and what pivotal moments led you to where you are today?
Yeah, so I've alluded a little bit, but I'll give more clarity. So again, kind of raised in Christian environment but it was never real to me. So, that actually can kind of actually become damaging at some point because you kind of have all these things and thoughts, but then you don't have any good reason to be following them or obeying Jesus or anything. So then it just becomes, it's like almost going to a wedding with all the stuff, the cake, the reception, the party, all the money you spent, but there's like not another spouse up there. You're just standing up there with no one. And you're just like, then you kind of look back, you're like, you would be really pissed and bitter. You're like, oh, well, you'd kind of like, if you have this wake up moment, you'd be like, well, we just wasted a bunch of money. Well, why'd we just do that? We just wasted everyone's time. Like that. It's funny. That's actually what I think is a very similar metaphor to what happens when Jesus isn't actually at the center of following or doing traditional kind of Christian behavior, which is like you should be doing, reading the scriptures and prayer, etc. But without him, that feels wildly weird and you would actually be frustrated. So that was kind of me. College, freshman year, I play baseball all the way through college, but the place I play freshman year, I just had a real bad year. I just started making really poor decisions, got put on academic probation, almost got kicked out of the college, got kicked off the baseball team because of it. My first serious girlfriend broke up with me. And so I just kind of was like, that was basically the first smack in the face I've ever had from life. We're just like, whoa, holy cow. We're here. I'm like, I might get kicked out of this school. I'm no longer even doing the thing I'm here for, baseball. And then I thought this girl I thought I was going to marry her, be a very serious relationship, and she wants nothing to do with me because I'm making such bad decisions. So it's kind of just like, I'm making some bad decisions. Let's assess the fruit. And so that was my first wake up call. Like, whoa, I think the way I would put it is like it was the first time in my life I've realized like, oh, me as the driver of my life, me as the person in the driver's seat, it doesn't end well. I don't trust myself. I have some bents and proclivities in my heart that I don't think are without them being healed or redeemed or shaped, won't lead me to a really good place. And so that was kind of I think there's, something more here. And I had some friends in high school and stuff that were really, really strong Christians, but I never really had kind of taken it seriously. So the long story of that short is basically through some phone calls with them, so reading books, reading the scriptures. I don't have one of those experiences of like, oh, I prayed one night and it was just this miraculous experience. But a couple months of that, of like, oh, I'm really making poor decisions. I need to assess my life. I need to ask the big questions. Why am I here? Who is God? Who am I? What am I doing? All these things. I kind of just like 4 months into that, I think I just go, oh, I think I'm following Jesus now. Like I really like him. I really appreciate his teachings. I'm starting to like bend my entire life towards what he says. My heart feels different. My desires feel different. And so that was really kind of how I came to faith. That would have been 15 years ago now, almost 16 actually, when I was 19. And so that's how I came to faith. And then, yeah, that would, other pivotal moments for me would be that that's obviously a major one. But in my own personal journey with faith, I would say obviously marriage, the birth of my kids, not just because those are great moments of your life, but because those really do make you, those are very large decisions that really, again, make you face up with, what am I doing here? What's the point here? What do I need to be? Fatherhood specifically took me into that. Fatherhood is really deeply, I have a 10-year-old, 8-year-old, 6-year-old, almost 6-year-old, excuse me, and a baby on the way. That just really tipped the scales for me of, oh man, my life is in service of someone else in the best sense of the word. That's where meaning can be found. That's where joy can be found. My life's not meant to just bend back on myself for me, and all the things that I want and desire. And so, yeah, that was one I could think of. I'm sure there's more, but that was fatherhood has been deeply, deeply pivotal to my faith and journey for sure.
Congratulations, by the way, the one on the way.
Thanks, man. Yeah, it's a big gap. We were on pause for a long time, and so that was, I was begging her to have more, and she was like, never, never, never. And so then it actually got kind of tumultuous. So I was like, okay, I just won't bring it up anymore. And then like 2 years into that, a year into that, she was like, hey, I think it's time to have another one. I was like, yes. So there you go.
How have your beliefs and perspectives evolved since you first started sharing your thoughts publicly? And do you belong to a church?
Yes. Yeah. No, I mean, I believe in the local church. I love church, man. We go to church for us, for the kids, for the belonging of just to, I mean, I think we're called, if you're Christian, to belong to a family, bigger than your family. I mean, like a church family. How my beliefs and thoughts changed over time. Let's see. I mean, my books are a really good way to track that. I would say, this is kind of getting into some serious insider baseball, but um, I would have called myself a lot more reformed early on in my walk with Jesus. I don't think I would call myself reformed anymore, and in that theological tradition. Maybe a better way to put it for those who aren't familiar is that more on the what I'm against, but what I'm for now. I've become a lot more liturgical, a little bit more of the ancient traditions of the church, whether that's Anglican, and some of the others. Just believing and really seeing the power of liturgy, which is just a huge Christian religious word for basically spiritual rhythms, meaning like these things that we place in front of us, that we do repetitively and kind of submit ourselves to because they have preloaded meaning in them. And when we fill ourselves with those, then it kind of fills the bowl or fills the glass or fills the tank in a way where then because we have tons of secular liturgies. We do liturgies, we do repetitive spiritual rhythms for darkness all the time. We just don't realize it. For selfishness all the time, for ourselves all the time. And so I think I've really come to believe that we're like liturgical creatures. We're creatures of habit, spiritual habit, whether you realize it or not. And so that would probably be a belief that's changed of mine, of kind of a belief in more of kind of liturgical Anglican traditions over the last decade as a place of meaning and depth and rootedness and anchoredness and kind of sacredness that is technically not really a super evangelical tradition, that I would have been more apt to not believe 10, 15 years ago. So I don't know if that's what you're asking, but that was the first one that jumped into my brain.
Has your thoughts with like family and stuff like that changed a lot since baby number one to where you're at today?
Yes, 100%. Great question. Yeah, and I think even in what I just mentioned, I would even dovetail off that of like, man, that rhythms are the superpower of the family, and that I definitely came from a broken family, hyper individualistic because of that's kind of brokenness. That's what you tend to jump to because it's kind of individualism is usually what comes out when you're basing a group dynamic in survival, and in such a dysfunctional, poor family, it's just survival is all that really kind of matters. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think just having, the selfishness that comes out when you have kids of like, oh man, like I have to take care of this thing and this him or her and feed her and clothe her and bathe her. And like, it's just, it eradicates your selfishness in the best sense of the word. Like it really reforms it out of you. And then, coming to a really deep view of family, that's kind of my main mantle I talk about. Not only have I written books on it, but one of the main ministries I'm a part of it with family teams and Jeremy, who you know. And so, yeah, like a deep, deep change in my view of family. Of hey, family is not a collection of individuals just kind of like in this club to hang out together for safety and security. But family is actually a really, really, really deep rooted idea from the mind of God that can actually like help the individuals explode in their talent, in their vision, in their best self. Meaning, like an individual, this is a belief that would be against the culture, by the way, even though you don't realize it. An individual, according to scripture, is best, can be his best version of himself nested in a family, right? Not the family inhibits them. The group, and our culture believes that. Whether it's family or group, we kind of believe team or group inhibits the individual. When I really think you can be your best self on a team, whether that's a traditional family. And I don't define family in a nuclear sense either. That's very 1950s. The Bible defines family as just a legacy of a last name. So it doesn't matter if you're single, young, old, poor, rich, whatever, you're in a family. So biblically, the model of family is very large. It's actually like multi-generational. It's single and married. It's just anyone with this in this network of a last name. Of course, not everyone has the exact last name in the family, but you know what I mean. Generational team meant to go accomplish something, meant to be on mission for God, meant to push back the darkness and use their talents and treasures and giftings to work together for the kingdom of God. And I just, yeah, that not only was not even aware of that, I definitely didn't believe that, 10 years ago.
Yeah, I read your book and part of like preparation for the podcast, and also, so my wife, I'll tell this quick story. So my wife follows you and your wife on Instagram, I think. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
you got to get Jeff on for the podcast. I'm like, I didn't know who you were, truthfully. I'd seen your viral video, but I didn't, that's all I'd known.
Classic.
And I didn't know your name or anything. I just had seen it. And I'm like, look, I don't, podcast, whatever, invite anybody. So she's like, all right, I'll reach out. I'm like, look, reach out. I didn't think you guys would respond. so
no, I was happy to, man.
A DM, and yeah. And then when you said you're coming on, she's like, here, you got to read this. So I read the Taking Back Your Family. So that's what made me think of, cool. If your family views have changed. And I know
100%.
You recently said on social media, you moved from Hawaii to a more family friendly place. So I was wondering if that, if it was family that drove that decision or if there were other things as well.
Yeah, family certainly drove that decision. One interesting thing I'll kind of share on that I think is helpful is the way I thought about it is I heard a talk from Jeremy, hilarious enough. He had a really thoughtful talk I'd never heard from anyone at this idea of kind of like ways you should be fathering and the ways you should be differently fathering for every decade of your kid's life, right? So the slideshow was essentially, one slide on when your kid's 0 to 10, here's what you need to be thinking about. Here's assets you need to be building. Here's what you need to be developing spiritually in the home. Like it was just so thoughtful. And then the next one, 10 to 20. The next one, when your kids are 20 to 30, when your kids are 30 to 40. First of all, it's funny to even see a slideshow like that because most of us, once the kids hit 18, we think we're done. When again, the biblical model is like, you're apprenticing your kid till he's 80, or you're in a relationship with them for just generations. Like that's just how it is. And so that was interesting. But yeah, his 10 to 20 stage, he basically was like, you really need to consider as a dad giving your kids the best resources possible in that stage and the highest ceiling possible in that stage, because it's such a pivotal 10 years for the rest of their life. Usually you're going to decide most likely at least start dating, but who you're going to maybe marry by the end of that 20, like when you're 20-ish, right? What school you're going to go to, what vocations you like, your kind of desirings and giftings are starting to get calcified and solidified, at least enough to you to make some serious decisions in direction of that. So you're like, whoa. And as he talked, I just realized like Maui, where we lived, wasn't that. I was actually I was lowering my kid's ceiling by being there there's no industries, there's no jobs, there's no colleges, there's really not even really people I could see my kids aspirationally dating in 10 years. Like it's just the vibes there are kind of like, oh, that's not, we're good. There's so many different layers where I was like, man, this is ranking 2 out of 10 on every category that I pull it. Now, is it beautiful? Is it amazing? Were people incredible there? Absolutely. Community is amazing, etc. But we really wrestled with those metrics and be like, man, now's the time, because you don't want to move a kid when they're 16. Of course you can for fine reasons, but you know what I mean? Like there's something wise about that. So yeah, we kind of said, hey, pull the parachute. Let's go somewhere with a higher ceiling for also the Lord, like better churches, better youth groups, better aspirations, better peers, better young adult ministries, better colleges, better jobs, better dating prospects. Like those are things you should be thinking as a parent that weirdly we think maybe is too high control. I don't know, but it's like why in any other setting a CEO of any company or anything would do that for days. They'd be like, hey, I think we need to put our business in Texas, not California, right? That's what everyone's doing right now. That's why I picked that example. But you know what I mean, right? So it's like if the parents are the visionaries and the executives of the family, then of course they're going to try to do whatever they can to give the kids the highest ceiling. So yeah, great question.
How do you perceive the role of Christianity and religion overall in today's rapidly changing cultural landscape?
I think it's changing. It needs to change, and I think we just have to be really sensitive to what that's calling. I think a lot of people, there's kind of death pangs of power in the institutional church, meaning like historically the church has not had power. Historically, the church has not been, and I'm talking 2,000-year sample size, not like the last 200 years of America. Historically, they're the minority, they're the persecuted, they're the ones that don't have the power, and of course, maybe a little bit of Rome with Constantine, and then certainly in the West for a season. But like historically, across all countries of all times, it flourishes best when it's actually not in power. So that's an interesting thing that we need to reckon with, because a lot of people in today, we're certainly losing cultural credence in the West, the church, and it happened rapidly. So I get why it's frustrating to people. But in about 20 years, we went from kind of the Christians having the power and being deeply liked, meaning like you would get brownie points to be a Christian, to now it is like you are, if you even just say you're a Christian, and in a lot of parts of America, you're like hated, or they at least think that's what's wrong with where we're going and where they want the country to go. So, that also reminds me of Aaron Wren's positive, negative, neutral worldview, which I think is really helpful metric, where, Aaron Wren, I think, was the one who coined this. There's been kind of three dominant views of Christianity the last 25 years. But the reason it's really important is Christians have different weapons, for lack of a better term, or different ways they need to live, is all I'm saying, in each of those worlds. So a positive world would have been like the 1990s, meaning that it's very simple. It was positive to be a Christian. That's how it's defined. You could probably run for office that way. You could probably become voted president. It would probably make you just have better standing in your society or with your kid's little league baseball team of like, oh, that's a nice little cute religious family. And of course, there's still places in America that's true. Honestly, I'm probably even in one of them now. But for most of America, that's not true. So then kind of mid 2000s, early 2000s, it went to neutral world, which is where, again, it's just neutral to be a Christian. You're not in trouble. We don't hate you, but it's not really giving you any, street cred. It's not giving you any benefits, whatever. And we've absolutely jumped to a negative world, 100%, at least among the dominant political cities, the dominant forces of the cities, the urban, which drives where we go, the urban environments, whether it's LA, New York, even Austin, Seattle, you can go on and on. Major cities tend to drive worldviews. And so what's interesting is, again, it's different weapons for each one. So, a big weapon for the neutral world would have been winsomeness, right? Like kind of, we just need to be winsome. We just need to be really, really uber thoughtful and kind of, I don't know if it really says that, and that's a great weapon in a neutral world because people are still open to reasoning, right? Open to debate on the issue because it's neutral. It's like they're open to being convinced. But Wren has a really interesting point where he's like, a lot of Christians today are still using neutral weapons in a negative world, right? And it's just a way of stewarding power and influence. So it's not to say that there's like we need to I'm not that we need to pick up arms or anything like that in the negative world. He just says a negative world is just you have to say what is Christian and expect consequences. That's all he says. He's like, that is the weapon. Like, stop trying to butter it up. Stop trying to make it cute. There is an Orthodox, historic Christian church that has been around for 2,000 years that has been black, white, Ethiopian, Asian, which, by the way, the strongest, earliest church was in Ethiopia, by the way, for the first couple hundred years of the church. Most people don't talk about that. It's not this Western, dominant, European, white-centric view. Anyone who says that just hasn't read history because that's not true. And so he's like, and in all those times, you just got to say what the truth is. And you might get your head cut off in other parts of the world. I'm not fear-mongering. I don't think that's America. But it's certainly not going to give you cultural credit, like social credit. And so, again, I don't know where you guys stand on some of those things. But for me, that's just a very interesting sociological assessment of the last 25 years of evangelicalism with the positive, the neutral, and the negative. And when we misuse weapons of previous worlds for current worlds, that's a very fun topic of conversation.
Yeah, I don't know I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but I don't know if we've reached the point where I would say it's negative. Maybe I would say in my opinion, in the bubble that I'm in, I think it's more. I think it's still more towards neutral, but maybe on like the, lower, like a lower neutral side where there's definitely some negativity to it. But I think that's the kind of society today where the 10% or 5% or 10% of the extremes on everything make all the noise. And
Yeah.
80 to 90% of us in the middle. I don't know. I don't know if you polled 100 random people, even in a place that's extremely liberal, like just say New York City. I don't know if they would say it was a bad thing or against Christianity, but I do agree with you that most of them be like, I don't know anything about it. Or, that's not for me. Maybe, but you could be right. In the
Yeah, no,
bubble that
there's so
I'm in.
yeah, it'd be interesting if you research some or look up some of Ren's research that he's pulling from Pew and stuff like that. But yeah, it would suggest that there's been a dominant ideological shift in a lot of the country about how they feel about religion. Now, again, not everyone, but something like going from
Yeah.
70% to 75% saying that Christian is a positive thing to now. I think this research does show that like only 20% would say that now, maybe
Oh, wow.
15%. I mean, that's a dominant change in 25 years. Like
Yeah.
anything, even if it was a belief on like plastic bags, like, in 25 years to have that dramatic of a shift on like plastic bags, it'd be like, whoa, I was quick and dramatic. And so again, I'm not on the team of thinking that it's like so bad. I really don't think that. I think it's just,
Yeah.
I think maybe we're saying the same thing a little bit of just like trajectory, and the trajectory is certain go in
Yeah.
some direction. And I'm not looking to call it back either. Like I'm not one of those people of like culture warriors of like, oh, let's go back to positive. Let's go back to neutral. I'm actually saying, hey, there's really, really good precedent of both the neutral on its way to negative or the negative world for the historical church on having a lot of power. I mean, even a lot of the hospitals, a lot of the orphanages, a lot of these things historically that the Christian church is known for over the last 2,000 years, those actually were seeded in very different, like there's multiple large hospital conglomerates, not here in the U.S., but in Europe specifically. I'm thinking of a book John Ortberg wrote on it. I forget the book, what it was called, like Who Am I or something like that. But how those can be tracked to kind of Christians picking up and being the hands and feet of Jesus in a justice way, when things were really, really bad. Like even when Christians were unloved, and uncared for, and like no one wanted them, and they were maybe even persecuted pretty seriously at that time. I think we're talking like Roman days. But they were the ones that would pick up the babies on the doorsteps and all these things, and that's kind of how we get some of those things today, which is interesting to track that story. Tom Holland would argue something similar in Dominion, by the way, another really good book. But it's interesting thing to discuss.
Yeah, it is.
Which, by the way, where do you guys live?
We're in upstate New York. So
Okay.
anytime you say New York,
Upstate's different. I mean, I maybe
yeah,
meant like Manhattan, but
yeah.
yeah.
Not upstate's very different. It's like a different state.
Yes. Yes. But the urban cores
I,
drive the ideological environment, which is interesting. That's just because they have
for
so many
sure.
people, Have you ever seen those maps of like how many people, like 50% of our population lives in like 4 places? It's insane.
Yeah. There's no doubt that. Well, I shouldn't say no. I don't think that religion is definitely culturally less popular than it was in terms of like pop culture and people talking about it and that stuff. I just don't know if it. Maybe it has. I don't know if it's reached the point where it's like cultures. I don't know if it's anti-religion or if it's just like ignore religion. Like that's what I've seen more of, and the people that I've heard against it. It's more of like, yeah, I don't really listen to that. It's not like, oh, religion's a bad thing. There's definitely some of
Yeah.
that, but I don't
Yeah,
know.
maybe. It's a fun conversation for sure.
The whole reason I had Jeff on, Dad, was for him to bring up that thing about having to parent me till I'm 80. I just wanted to be ready for that.
It looks different once they're adults. Let me say that, but still a father, still a son.
How do you think faith communities could do a better job of connecting with younger people who may feel disconnected from traditional religious practices?
Yeah, I think the simple answer to that is meet their needs, help meet the actual needs. I mean, that's again, Christians are called to be the hands and feet of Jesus. Literally, that's what the theological implication is arguing in Corinthians, which is the picture of like what Jesus did. Now we are to do. So I think a lot of times we get so caught up in the religion side of it, of just doing things, just these behaviors that give us markers of pride, or they give us markers of feeling good, or they make us feel like we're in the in group and not the out group, whatever, rather than, man, like we are here to be on mission for other people. And so I think anyone, but I also think, I think anyone feels like this, but I also think to your point about specifically younger people who maybe don't feel like at home in religious communities, or sorry, traditional religious practices, I think is how you phrased it. I would say, just be in relationship with them, for those listening, and meet their needs. One of the fascinating things about Jesus, if you open up the book of John, he always answered people's right where they were at, and it was always fascinatingly hyper singular and unique. So I mean, you go to John chapter 3, and we get the famous, for God so loved the world, he gave his one and only son. But that's the same chapter. That the main story in that chapter is actually a guy named Nicodemus who comes to him, who's a religious guy, who comes to him in the middle of the night and says, "Hey, teacher," like because he's not allowed to, talk to Jesus without, getting in trouble himself, because Jesus was quite a troublemaker. The religious guy of the day was like, "Hey, Jesus," in the middle of the night, which is hilarious because he didn't want to be seen. What's he say? Oh yeah, how do I get kind of like, what's the way? What's the way? How do I do this? And Jesus says, "You must be born again." And then he was really confused by that, because he's like, what do you mean? I can't crawl back into my mother's womb. It was a whole weird thing with the Hebrew and what the implications were and all that. But Jesus meant like spiritually, like you need to have a rebirth. You need to be reborn, not just do a bunch of good things. Like there needs to be something that actually like transforms you on the inside and makes you a whole new person. And that can only happen from the power of the Holy Spirit, theologically speaking. But next page is so he has a super stoic kind of religious guy, like Nicodemus's archetype in that story would be like a pastor today. Okay. Next page, John 4, is Jesus and the women at the well. So this is a Samaritan. I mean, they have this is very similar to like the kind of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Like they had hated, the Samaritans and Israelis had hated each other for thousands of years at this point, most likely. They despised each other. She was also a woman. She was also a promiscuous woman. So there's tons of layers around this story around she is the lowest rung on the ladder for a lot of different reasons, according to Jewish law and to a Jewish male, Jesus. So he's not even supposed to speak to her. That was actually a rule. But he talks to her. He blows her mind with how kind and gracious and loving he is. But then what he says when he starts understanding her problem, he says, "Oh, you need a drink of the you need the eternal water. You need water that satisfies, because you're going after all these things to try to satisfy you, but you've never actually drinking from the true thing that'll truly satisfy you," right? And what's interesting about that is, listen how different those are, right? He didn't go to Nicodemus and say, "You need to drink from the water of eternal life," and he didn't go to the woman of the well and say, "You need to be born again." And I think that's a really important point, is Jesus was hyper specific to hyper specific needs and to exactly where those people are, and he met them exactly where they are. So I think that's a really good lesson. It's kind of a roundabout way of answering your question, but hopefully that helps.
Do you think that there's specific issues, things like, again, like the hot button would be like something like abortion. Do you think there's certain issues that the church needs to kind of approach in a different way in order to try to attract a younger congregation? Or do you think that's, I don't know, I guess, is that a way for the church, or do you think that's not the right way?
Yeah. So there's a couple different ways to answer that. I think the exact way you phrased it, I would say, yeah, like I do think we need to approach things differently. I would say, I don't know, the one thing we have to wrestle with again, whether we're in a neutral or a negative world, it's like, we're not getting any street cred. So it's like and I think that is a big mistake people make, of like, oh, let's ban the historical, witness of the Orthodox Church for the last 200 years. When again, like there's some beliefs that both Christian church, so 2,000 years of a Christian tradition, 6,000 years, of a Jewish tradition, and 1,500 years of a Muslim tradition all unanimously agree on. And I think it's one of the most arrogant, prideful things in the world to say, well, I think us in the 21st century, with all of our mental illness, with all of our craziness, with all of our unhealth, with all of our inability to even be that strong or wise or healthy, and showing how obviously like not healthy we are socially and mentally, I think we should change all that. Like, it's just like that. That feels so arrogant. It doesn't feel arrogant, in my opinion, to be like, I'm going to have to defer to 2,000 years of tradition here And again, let's remind ourselves, that's not a bunch of white guys. That's Ethiopian Christians in the year 300 AD. That's medieval Christians in the year 800 in Europe. That's Native American Christians. Like, this is tribe, tongue, all these things. And abortion, by the way, has been one of those things that has been wildly on the side of Christians supporting life. Now, do I have a ton of frustration around how today in our political West, how Christians engage with it? Yes. They're not consistent on like, well, if you believe in life, then let's talk about the death penalty, because I have some thoughts on the death penalty, right? And all these different ways of being inconsistent, not truthful, being, living a life of sin themselves and frustration. I think another way to think about it is, I forget the exact five. I would have came ready if this question was coming. There's basically like kind of five major markers, we could think of it in today, of like where people put you in camps. Okay. Of like, life would be one. So like abortion, but also some other stuff. Life, race would be one. Like social government and kind of how they help and how they like serve in that regard. And a couple other ones. But essentially, Tim Keller, who's one of my favorite theologians, has the really interesting point that whatever those five are, and again, I'm missing a couple. Essentially, two or three of those is what would be called Democratic, and two or three of those would be kind of called Republican today. But yet, a Christian should believe all of those. Meaning those are tenets of Christianity. So that kind of just shows you, hey, we're clearly not on anyone's team. I'm not going to allow myself to be co-opted by the right. And I'm not going to certainly let myself be co-opted by the left, where, the church has always kind of been prophetically above politics, speaking prophetically into letting people know, and our leaders know, hey, you will be held liable one day when you face Jesus. Like, that's a serious thing that we need to remind people of, Now, of course, the way that the church engages with power has been an issue for 2,000 years. You can go to the papacy, you can go to, the famous moment with Napoleon and the Pope, and Napoleon wanted the Pope to crown him emperor in 1799, because he believed that it's showing the second most powerful person is kind of almost bowing by giving the crown to Napoleon. And then the Pope in that moment actually says, I want to be the one giving the crown to show Napoleon that he's accountable to me as the first power. So it's like, you can see, like, there's just lots of layers. But all that to say, I'm sorry, I jumped to random like historical examples. But that's a real thing. So I'm long-windedly saying, yes, I think we do need to change our approach. I think our approach needs to change. I don't think necessarily some of the beliefs need to change. But I do think the way we've gone about our approach, because we were in a positive world for so long, is like bludgeoning, painful, hurtful, condemning, judgmental, and you can go on and on. And I think there needs to be some serious apologies and repentance from the church in that regard. But I think that's different than kind of like bowing the knee to like another ideological demagogue in our world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, it does.
Sorry, I get kind of deep. I don't know if that's what you want me to do.
No, it's perfect. It's perfect.
You've written extensively about marriage. What key principles do you believe contribute to a thriving relationship?
I've only been married for 5 minutes, so I don't have much to speak on that. We have written one book, Love That Lasts, on that. And then Take Back Your Family, obviously, is from a different perspective. So tongue in cheek, jokes aside. Yeah, I want to make sure that I can only speak from what I know. And so it's like, yeah, man, I'm still learning so much about marriage, and, we're only a decade and a half into this. And so lots to learn, and still lots to pay attention to from mentors and wise sages who have gone before. Maybe one principle that has, at least, I will say this though, like, we haven't been married very long, 12, 13 years, I think, this week, actually. But it's, but I don't know if it's just our friend group or people around us. Like, people are dropping like flies. Like, I feel like we've been married 100 years with how many affairs and divorces and situations that have come up in our circle. And I'm like, holy cow, man, it's hard. It's really hard. It's really difficult. And so
statistically now it's like over 50%, right? Isn't it closer to 60%
yes.
now?
Yeah. You're like, that's wild. That is wild and really discouraging. But I would say one principle that I think is really helpful is, a lot of times we have bought the American lie that like relationships are meant to fulfill us and make us happy. But what that's doing is that's subtly putting marriage in a contractual relationship. And a contractual relationship does this. It's a contract. So it says, you know, if you, there's kind of two things in a relationship. There's the promise and there's the behavior. So in a contract relationship, the behavior is stronger than the promise. You basically say, I promise to be in a relationship with you. But if the behavior is ever greater than the promise, meaning like if it's bad enough, then contract's over, you're fired, you're out of the relationship. That's like a working relationship. That's what that is. In a job, in a contract, you break it, you're fired. So it's like the behavior is a stronger glue than the promise in a contractual relationship. But in a covenantal relationship, it's the exact opposite. The promise is stronger than the behavior, if that makes sense. And so the promise of, I will never leave you, I will never forsake you, which is what our vows actually say. Those are covenantal promises. Is stronger than the behavior. And what that implicates is when you're in a contract relationship, you're incentivized to hide when things are difficult, and you're incentivized to like protect yourself because, well, if I share too much, if I'm too vulnerable, if I'm too honest, then I'm going to get fired. And of course, there's a technicality there with marriages of like, man, stuff can get really, really bad. And there is reason for divorce sometimes, by the way. But for 99% of us, or 95% of us, or whatever you want to say, there's actually incentive in a covenant relationship to be honest, not hide, because the promise is stronger than the behavior. So you can be vulnerable, you can be honest. And that actually is the magic of marriage, is when a spouse fully sees all that you are, everything, your failures, your frailty, your shortcomings, and says, hey, I still want you, I still choose you, over and over and over and over and over again for 70 years. That literally is the magic of marriage. And so that's what I would say, if that helps, is like kind of that paradigm between covenant versus contract is a really helpful way, I think, to think about relationships.
Oh, yeah. And the social media stuff too is such a disaster. I think the instant gratification. I remember I read something a while ago. I don't know how long ago, but it was saying that like over 50% of the divorces mentioned like social media. I think specifically maybe it was Facebook. was cited in the reason for
divorce. 100%. And I just
can be so powerful.
Yep. No, it's brutal, man, with relationships. 100%. Like I have friends where it's like, that person from high school 20 years ago, and it's like, man, think about how easy it was 100 years ago. You dated someone, even if you were like madly in love with them, they were your first love. I'm guessing 100 years ago, if you broke up, you literally never saw or even saw a reminder or even like a scent or even like anything of that person again. Like that would have been so much easier to actually move on with your life, you know?
Yeah.
How has becoming a parent influenced your understanding of God and your approach to teaching faith to your children? Can you share this with us?
Yeah, great question. Really great question. Also, Troy, I didn't even ask. You're married, but you guys have kids? Yeah.
Yeah. So I've got a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 1-year-old, and a 1-month-old. So basically, it's basically just everyone's like just under. So it's basically 6, 4, 2, 0, but they're all like just. Months
that's exactly what we did, except we didn't go for the fourth that way. But that's I love the every 2 years or every under 2 years. That's exactly what we did. Yeah. It's so fun. Great question, Tim. I would say, it was kind of what I alluded to earlier, how fatherhood has changed me so much. But then to the faith aspect, I think, it's really interesting if you come to the Bible, and again, if you're faith guy, not a faith guy, whoever's listening, if you come to the Bible honestly, then you're gonna notice there's a lot of metaphors that God himself uses for himself, right? And of course, at the end of the day, a container of a metaphor can only contain so much because of a limitless being. But you do have to kind of pay attention. Again, if we were to put like our Sherlock Holmes hat on, it's like, this metaphor is only used once. This metaphor is used 5,000 times, right? Then it's like, then it kind of would, if I use that, then it'd be like, the 5,000 time one, I'm really trying to get you to understand something. And that one in the scriptures is Father. Like, he is that is the dominant way in which God wants us to see him. Now, that's tough because in our, again, this is a stat, by the way, that in today's culture, more kids are in fatherless homes more than any other time in human history. That's an insane stat if you really sit in it. I think it's something like wild. It's almost in the 70th percentile, at least once during your 18 years, meaning like at least sometime in your 18 years, the father will leave or not be in the home for a significant part of your life. That's wild. So some of us have some really difficulties with that. And Troy, maybe you'd be a good example of not of like, man, you when you kind of project on to God what it means to be a father. Of course, all of our fathers, even if our father's like, the most kingly, perfect, amazing person, is going to fall short. But it allows us to like kind of have a jump start. Like, what does that mean? And so I think for me, it really changed how I see faith, because I didn't have that, right? I didn't have a father who was present, who was kind, who was gentle, who was tender, who cared about me, who spoke life into me, who had my best interest at heart. And so knowing that, man, I've had to do some reworking of that, but that is what Jesus came to show us, is that God, the perfect father, this father who loves us, wanted to, take all of our sin, give us new life, and essentially make us the best version of ourselves, is essentially what kind of the resurrection is. And the invitation to that was deeply, deeply impactful to me in my life. And then but being a dad, excuse me, you like, it just comes alive in that way. You're like, oh, my care for my kids' hearts is 1/1000th of how God feels about me, is also really easy to comprehend. Of like, holy cow, what that just, stops you dead in your tracks when you realize the weight you carry. Even when, you can feel this with your kids. If they're having a really tough time, sometimes you're really frustrated, but a lot of times you're like, man, don't they just know I care for them so deeply that I actually want them, and like they're more burdensome on your heart when they're going through a tough time. And it's like, man, that is God the Father. The relational dynamic and the relational aspect God wants to try to get us to understand about what he wants is that. And that's just pretty wild. So yeah, hopefully that answers that one. But that's another good one.
Yeah. No, I grew up in I can't say this with him on here. We had some fun times. No, my dad was unbelievable. And one of the things that happened with my dad too, is like, we went through a lot in your book. You talk a lot about like seasons, and you mentioned a couple times like seasons. I think it's a perfect way to look at it, because my dad and I were always extremely close, but then like we had some seasons where I would get in trouble at school and we would butt heads and whatever.
Totally.
Part of like being a kid. And I think too, like being probably a boy and their dad, like probably, testosterone and all that. But then like one day I got to and I don't know how old I was. I don't even know. Maybe I was 16, 17. I was like, man, all those things we were fighting about, it doesn't affect him at all. He was doing it for me. Like he doesn't give a rat's ass what it doesn't affect him, my grade in math class. Like that doesn't do anything for him.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter to him if I'm working hard and, at football, if I'm lifting weights, like he gets nothing out of this relationship. Like it's truly. So anyways, that was something for me where it was like, I hate to use a religious comparison because it's it's very, very different, but it was almost like an aha, it was like a light bulb moment for me where I was just like, oh wow, all of this stuff he's doing is, and then that's when I thought I appreciated my dad and my mom too, my parents. But then like when you have kids, you're like, oh, okay. I remember when we had our daughter, she was like, I don't even know, 3 days old, and I called my parents like, guys, thank you.
100%.
I changed 40 diapers in 72 hours.
Yes. 100%, man. And yeah, to your point, I think that's such a salient point, honestly, dude, of like so many times in what they're pouring out for us, it does nothing for them. They're not doing it for anything except for us. And we miss that so deeply, but they're also so long suffering in it of just being willing to, no matter what we feel, because they just know that, they have our best interest at heart,
Yeah. And I hope with my kids that like when you have to have you can't just be the fun dad all the time. And when you have those tough moments, I'm hoping that one day like they'll have that, aha moment where it's like, oh,
yes,
maybe dad didn't want to drive me to the ice rink 6 days a week.
Yes, exactly.
How do you manage the daily demands of family life with your work and ministry commitments?
Yeah, another good question. I think it was kind of that little breadcrumb I left earlier of the word when I said rhythms. I think having really, really healthy, robust, rich rhythms as a family, not just personally, but as a family, is really kind of non-negotiable. And it doesn't feel rigid, meaning like there's just big stakes in the ground for our family of whether it's Friday night Sabbath dinners and, where her parents come over also every single Friday and we light a candle and then the kids have to pepper them with stories. And we're going 10 years on that now where the grandparents every Friday night have basically been on like a storytelling hot seat at a dinner once a week of like, tell us about your childhood. What was your favorite Christmas present? Who did you date when you were younger? What calls did you get? Like it's endless. And we're 10 years in and the kids haven't ran out of questions. Like that is one of the most life-changing, life-giving rhythms I could ever think of, but that's so easy. It's just, but it's on the calendar. It's just like a rhythm. It's like we've dedicated to it. We've committed to it. And yet over 10 years, that has compounded to be one of the richest, most special things we have. And then a day of rest for our family on Saturday, it kind of builds into that as well. You could have spiritual disciplines in the day and things like that. But though you have to have those or else all the energy of everything else wins. The work wins because it's very easy for me to be on my phone 24/7, both in wasting time, but also just like calls and phone calls and more and emails. And I hate emails. I have like 3,000. I mean, you probably know this, Troy. I'm way better on text, but it takes me forever to get back on emails just because I'm like getting buried over here. But then, I think I text you back in like 20 minutes. And so it's hard. It's really hard. But when you have like rhythms and borders and disciplines and ways that you can do it, put it in a weekly way, we tend to live in a weekly rhythm, then I think it's a really helpful like safeguard against a lot of those things, if that makes sense. And then you kind of get to craft the life you want. Like, so rather than just letting work suck every moment from every single day, it's like, how about we reverse engineer a week? Like we're in charge. We can do whatever we want. How about we just build this into this day, this into this day, this into this day. And then if anyone else wants any other time, well, then they got to fit it in, And it's also fun too, when you put something on the calendar for your family or whatever, and you can honestly, without lying, when someone wants that time slot, you just say, oh, sorry, something's on the calendar, because it literally is. But it might just say family nap time. You never know, But hey, I got something on the calendar then, so I will not be there.
Can you share any stories of how your work has impacted individuals or communities?
Yeah, there's a lot. Well, no, that sounded really pretentious. There's a few. But I mean, just like my work is more trying to serve people's lives, so that it does tend to speak into that space. I would say the one that's my favorite to this day is somewhere over in the house over there. I don't know, so upstairs somewhere on a bookshelf. There's a copy of my first book, Jesus, Grade and Religion, which is crafted in the same kind of vein of the video. So this is 10 years ago now, 12 years ago now. I was speaking at a church, and a guy came up to me after, and the book is just destroyed. It's tattered. It looks like 5 million people have read it, which is kind of true. I'll tell you that in a sec. Is a guy came up to me after church, and he handed me the book. He's like, hey, I want you to have this. And I was like, oh, cool. It's my book. It looks really tattered. And he goes, well, I want you to open up the first page. And I opened up the first page, and I think there was like a list of like 75 names, like, kind of like written on the, all in, you could tell their own handwriting. And he was like, hey, I'm a chaplain at a prison. And this book just like literally got like read and then like passed around and then read and passed around, like in this like underground kind of viral, like, oh, let me read it next. And just like changed, super, super encouraged and transformed like these 75 men's lives. And he's like, I just really, really, really want you to have this because I think it would be really special to you. And he was absolutely right. It's like it's been like one of my most prized possessions for 10 years. So that's a really, really cool, fun story to know that, man, and there's even a lot of people in my family have been to prison and in and out of prison. And I think I'm actually the only one who hasn't. I think I am. And I've been arrested, so it's close. But yeah, that was a fun little tidbit.
Yeah, you got to explain that story.
Well, mine was a quick one. It was interesting. It was simple. I was a teenager, shoplifting, the classic. But I do feel bad for my friend was a Division I lineman recruit. So we were high schoolers. So he was getting recruited, I think, to the Air Force Academy. So he's 6'4", like 300 pounds. And I'm just this tiny little guy. And I didn't tell him that I stole as we were leaving the store. And so we just get in the car and like the whole SWAT team or what, it was one cop car, but that's what it felt like. Just put on the brakes. They blocked us. And they were watching us the whole time and waiting for us to actually do it. So they just like, just raged on us, ripped him out of the car because he was the huge man, and just like manhandled him, threw him on the ground. He was like, what is happening? And so we laugh about it now, but it was horrendous when that actually happened. And we were so shook up that they arrested us, put us in the back of the cop car. But they were like, you guys are so shook up, I can tell that you actually really will probably never do this again. So they just released us. So thankfully my tears got me out of prison that night, or not prison, but jail. So all that to say, that book is one of my favorite like prize possessions. And that's a really, really, I think of that every time a question like that comes up, Tim, because that's just really, really encouraging to me that these men that a lot of culture and society has written off, we don't care about them anymore. They can just, whatever. We're really encouraged by my story and stuff like that. So yeah.
You mentioned your work a few times, Jeff. What is it that you're actually doing?
What do I do like on a daily basis? I don't know.
No, more like you took this video and you parlayed it into, a career of, obviously you write books, but what are you doing on, what's your kind of main job, I guess, outside of
Great question.
What's your main
Well, I'm very ADHD, so that answer feels like that. The answer is going to feel like that. But I mean, I've written 6 books, traditional published, 5 or 6 more resources, self-published, run kind of am like founder or like director or leader of like 3 different Christian ministries. I own a couple businesses. One of them is a successful women's clothing business with my wife and our good friend. So it's like 2 couples that own it. What else? Some real estate. Like I just kind of do whatever. Just do whatever I want to do. But yes, that's the answer to that question.
Looking back, what are some significant lessons you've learned from your journey that you wish you knew earlier?
The one that jumps to my mind, just because I think we've mentioned fatherhood and parenting and all that stuff and motherhood and stuff with my mom is I think just, man, I wish I was kinder to my parents growing up. I really wish I was. Like, you once you become a parent and you see what it takes, especially my mom, single mom. I mean, a single parent, you realize that with a spouse. Now you're like, that is insane. No breaks, no days off, just like how difficult it is. And then especially the level of poverty, we were in. So I would say that I feel like that's one of the lessons I wish is just like how deeply we should cherish our parents, even if they're not perfect. And how much of a gift that relationship can be, I would say is definitely one of the things I wish I knew earlier. And maybe every person would say that just because we tend to, as kids, almost all be like that. But I would say that one for sure.
My dad, I'm going to talk for you for a second. My dad had this great thing he said to me. He said when, not talking about himself, but talking about like people with their parents and frustrations they have with their parents and whatever. He said, like, your parents did the best that they could at that time. Like
with the information they had.
Yeah. No one's there like, oh, I want to be a bad dad. Like everybody wants to do good, but at that time in their life, in that season, right? Like that's the best they could do. And it might not be as good as others, but it's the best that they could do at the time.
100%. And then you have grace for each other when you believe that.
What advice would you offer to someone struggling with their faith or searching for meaning in their life?
When I'm asked that in a more of a Christian tradition or Christian trajectory, Christian environment, what I tell people is, man, have those doubts with Jesus, meaning like communicate with him. Now, again, no matter where anyone's at on faith, it's really, really difficult to believe that certainly that he didn't live, and even certainly how much the resurrection is pretty close to airtight on that it happened. So he's a real being who I think lives and breathes today. And so I think a lot of times in the Christian tradition, people, when they start having doubts, they believe they have to have those away from God. When I think God actually wants our doubts and enjoys our doubts. And so one thing I would actually really encourage people, I know a lot of people historically too, again, for thousands of years, have had insane levels of encouragement of doubting seasons, difficult seasons, even seasons of suffering, which is different, but similar, by reading the Psalms. I mean, that's an ancient prayer book in the Bible that is so visceral, it would make most 80-year-old church ladies like faint if they actually read it for what it said. Like it's actually like deeply, graphically, emotionally visceral. And now let's put that in context. We're like, oh, sure, of course. But that's in the Bible. That's like the actual scriptures that people have honored and called sacred for thousands of years. Those like special words. There's people like, cursing God, yelling at God, frustrated at God, saying prayers of lament and frustration. And because again, there's something about that's actually what the human experience, how the human experience benefits is by going through the cycle of grief in a wrestle with God, not away from him, because only when we talk to him, we need to be polished up, buttoned up, perfect, and all these things. So I would say that's probably what I would say is bring your doubts to Jesus. I think he is wise enough to handle them and big enough to handle them. And so maybe hopefully that answers what you're asking.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think it's great advice for anyone going through that. Outside of your ministry and writing, what activities or hobbies are you passionate about?
Oh, that's easy. Pickleball with some pickleball with a side of pickleball, baby. I literally play like 6 days a week. It's my favorite thing in the world. I golf here and there too and stuff like that. But pickleball is so fun. Now I have a mantle I want to stand on about pickleball because I was born and raised in Washington State where it was invented. So I have been an OG to this game. Okay, I have been playing this game since from birth. What people don't realize, it's funny how much of a bubble it was in. Like probably half my friends growing up had pickleball courts in their backyard. And then it is the main sport you play in elementary, middle school, and high school PE. It's the main sport you play in Washington State. Now everyone's trying to just come tell me like, oh, have you heard of this new sport called pickleball? And I'm like, shut up. Like, let me tell you about this sport called pickleball. It's like, you think this sport's 2 years old? Jeez. How about me and Phyllis from the Senior Citizen Center in Seattle tell you how this sport's 50 years old? But yeah, that's my answer. It is fun. Troy, have you played?
I played a little bit. I'm definitely not as much, not since I was a little kid and not as passionate about it. But
yeah, you're never gonna get someone more passionate than me on pickleball.
We should have made this whole podcast about pickleball.
Oh, I will talk to you about pickleball for sure.
What about books? Have any books or authors significantly influenced your thinking? And if so, why?
Theologically, I really have been blessed by A.W. Tozer, Watchman Nee, N.T. Wright, all for different reasons. The first two, I would say, just like their passion for God. And then N.T. Wright is the foremost New Testament scholar who is just bar none better than anyone else on the resurrection of Jesus, on its historicity, its verifiability, its implications for the world we live in. And it's just blessed my faith. Outside of those spaces, I mean, I obviously love a classic Malcolm Gladwell, kind of not only him, but esque author. So Adam Grant also is in that realm. I actually, and I think it comes across in my books, I read a ton of like sociological kind of pop journalism, if you want to call it maybe. I'm not sure, the phrase for that, but I just really, really enjoy understanding the world and I love understanding people. And so those books have really shaped me. I just read a book called Empire of Pain. That was a fascinating book about the Sackler dynasty. That's the family that invented OxyContin. And man, that was a very interesting book that gives you such a good slice of humanity and psychology and greed and power and all these things. And so, I think that helps. Probably a couple theological books, a couple culture books, but that's, Culture Code. That's probably my favorite parenting book. That's a business leadership book. But it's my favorite parenting book by bar none. It's not religious at all. It's like I don't know what he is, a professor or a journalist, but Culture Code is my favorite parenting book. And it's basically a guy that studied healthy cultures in business and leadership. So there's a chapter on the Navy SEALs, chapter on the Golden State Warriors, chapter on stuff like that. And it's just like, it's so good. So good.
Is there a topic or message you want to discuss that you feel hasn't been addressed yet, or maybe one we missed?
No, not at all. And in fact, you guys brought it all over the place, which I love. Those are questions I haven't heard before, discussions I haven't had before. And that's honestly, I really enjoy that. So honestly, I think that's a testament to your guys' research, care for conversation, and just the fun of it. But I love that. Usually, you guys know the drill. On a lot of podcasts, it's just like, I've been asked the same question, 17,000 times, which is fine because I want to serve their audience and that's different people. But you guys, this was great. I really enjoyed this. And so, no, there wasn't. It was fun. I actually really loved how broad you guys went.
I always try to include this question. Would you like to tell us about your wife and kids? Feel free to brag.
Oh, I shall. I do have an amazing family. I will say that I'm very lucky, and I think I have amazing kids because of an amazing wife I have. So she's amazing in and of herself, but it's also a testament, I think, to the kids. So Alyssa, she's amazing. She's everything that I do, she does herself. So, anyone listening, go look up her books. Her books are amazing. She just came out with one a month ago, and they're not just to women. A lot of women's authors are just to women, but she writes in the same vein, spiritual formation and content and stuff. But hers can be read by everyone. They're very, very good. She's amazing. She's incredible. so thankful she said yes to me, whatever, 14 years ago when I was some dingleberry trying to get her attention. Took a few times, but I ended up working her over with my suave handsomeness. And then, 10-year-old Kinsley, who won an amazing character award at school yesterday for her attentiveness, the teacher said, which was really cool in front of the whole school. And you know me, I yelled as loud as I could, which was awesome. All the parents were like, and then Cannon, my son, who also won a character award for his courageousness. And again, it's only 1 or 2 per class, and it's like once a quarter. So that was really cool. They won one on the same day. And then Lucy, our youngest, who didn't win a character award, so I was sad for her, but she was sad for her. She was happy for her siblings because she didn't care. She's 5, and she's like, I don't care. And they're amazing. Very rambunctious, high energy, high flying, cliff jumping type family, but they're the best.
Now on to our final word segment, where we ask our guests a few rapid fire questions. What was the happiest moment in your life?
Oh, so many. The wedding day popped up. I really love Alyssa, love our marriage, and love that. And then we had a really, really good day. That was like one of those ones where there was no edits. It was a blast. It was a party.
What is the biggest adversity you've faced?
I've had 2 really, 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 really difficult business partnerships. I write about those in my book. From a money perspective, from a life perspective, just where all had to give everything up in faith. And that could have meant really, really, really different life before or after. And those were probably the more challenging. Those what gave me my gray hairs and are just super, I'm super grateful on the other side for them. But those for sure, I'd probably say.
What are you most excited about?
Elon Musk's robots, for sure, that he just pitched. No, I'm joking. Probably more just my kids, the future. As they get older, it's just richer and richer and richer and sweeter and sweeter and sweeter.
The name of our podcast is Nothing Left Unsaid. Do you have anything you want to say?
Go Seahawks. 0-3 of the last 3 weeks, depending on when you air this. Maybe they're doing better by then. Maybe they're not doing better by then. But go Hawks. They're really sucking it up the last 3 weeks, so they need it.
Awesome. And then last question is, I asked this, so we didn't want to get pigeonholed into just being about football or just being about ALS or religion or writing. So at the end of every episode, I ask the guest, who are a couple of people that you know personally that you think we should try to have on the podcast?
Oh, I would need to think about that more. You might have to follow up with me because now that I want to be really thoughtful with it. But I think there could be some people, even here, man. There's some sports guys here that I've met that have played in like the major leagues. I know a couple of football buddies of mine that are also of faith, but also great football guys. There's a buddy of mine who had a really serious injury in the NFL that maybe I can link you up with, and it has just really interesting perspective on what that means when your career ends a little shorter than you wanted to and a little quicker than you wanted to. He's got a few Super Bowl rings. And then, man, I got to think on that. But I follow up with me on that, and I think it'd be fun to see if I can think of something. Yeah,
I will for sure. Thanks so much for joining us today. Shout out my wife, Jessica. Thanks for getting Jeff on.
Yes. Well, thank you guys. Seriously, it was a huge blast, man. Super encouraging. And I really enjoyed the conversation. So Tim, thank you, man, for all you've done, all you are doing. And I'm really excited for the books too. I knew you wrote books, but for some reason I didn't know any of the kids ones. So I just ordered a bajillion because my kids are right in that age. They're just blowing through everything right now. Boxcar Children, Magic Treehouse, all these things. I'm like, I need books. So thank you so much. But you too, Troy, big time. You guys are over in Franklin. Let me know.
It's been such a pleasure to get to know you, Jeff. Blessings on your future work, and may God continue to bless your family.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And amen to that. So, but yeah, you too, Troy. Appreciate you guys a ton.
Yeah, thanks. And you got to let us know on the book. You got to give us honest reviews, though. You can't just say it's good because it's the number one New York Times bestseller. You got to cut it deep if you see the opening.
Deal. Now my kids will be excited, especially if I told them I talked to you and you played in the NFL and stuff. They'll be psyched. So I'll let you know.
Barkley Damon LLP is proud to be the law firm sponsor of Tim Green's podcast, Nothing Left Unsaid. For more on Barkley Damon's team of nearly 300 attorneys with regional, national, and global reach from our offices across the northeastern U.S., Washington, D.C., and Toronto, go to barclaydamon.com. I want to thank my partners at Barkley Damon for supporting this podcast, and of course 11 Labs for their incredible technology. If you liked today's episode, a free way to support the podcast is to subscribe and share it with friends. thank you. A significant amount of these sponsorships go to tackleals.com. For cutting-edge ALS research at Massachusetts General Hospital, if you want to make a contribution, go to tackleals.com.